Welcome to FinTech Confidential, bringing you the people, tech, and companies that change how you pay and get paid.
We are looking at identity and identity verification as a revenue generation opportunity, not as a fraud prevention opportunity.
And then ones that were really bad to good, not great, just good, we were seeing jumps from like 25 to 60%.
Democratizing and decentralizing identity. I say 6 billion individuals. We have now reduced the onboarding time by 80%. Their fraud rate went down by close to 60%. They only call you when they have to open a champagne. That's where the puck is headed. That's where we are headed. Identity fabric or identity verification or identity payments platform right now. And we are also moving away from being predictive, but we want to be more and more deterministic.
And it's starting to cost them anywhere from $4 to $6 every time they lose a single dollar. Losses in 2023 reached over $10 billion. It's not being able to respond fast enough.
It's a war amongst AI versus AI. And then the only AI that's going to win, it's the one that has more data. Everything revolves around payment. If I have to grow and if I have to do something, or if I have to make a difference, payments will be the place to do.
And you've seen this space from what I would guess to be just about every angle. Equifax, Proves, Singular, Key, and now you're leading KYXStart.
You are in a spy movie, but the fraudsters are winning with deep fakes and...
Hey, Tedd Huff here. Ever thought about how you could streamline your application and underwriting process? Well, let me introduce you to Under. Why keep using the outdated methods of PDFs when you can digitize them effortlessly? All you gotta do is upload the PDF, send it out for digital signature, and voila, you're set for the digital age. Are you curious on how to make that happen? Head over to under.io/FTC and get started for free. It's really that simple.
Welcome to FinTech Confidential Series Leaders One-on-One, where we sit down with FinTech leaders to learn about what drives their passion for FinTech, leadership lessons, and for their business through their life stories. I'm your host, Tedd Huff, and today's guest is Ravi Bijlani. He's the founder and CEO at KYXStart, and I'm excited to talk about what KYXStart is doing. Ravi, it is great to have you here today, man.
Absolutely. It's an honor and a pleasure to have this conversation with you, Ted.
You don't know who Ravi is. His track record doesn't just check the boxes. It builds a blueprint. And he spent over 25 years working inside of FinTech, identity and fraud prevention across some very high stakes roles. He's led the global expansion at Prove Identity. And before that, he served as the GM of fraud and identity at Equifax, where he helped build large-scale systems that verified millions and millions of users. He's also held board seats and advised at multiple FinTech startups and even has, yes, five U.S. patents in identity and fraud prevention with many more pending. And I can only imagine he's just getting started. So as you can imagine, he's not new to the complexity. He's built and scaled inside companies that grew fast and had to stay compliant. And today he's focused on solving the thing most fintechs still struggle with, and that is how to verify people accurately in real time and without losing good customers to bad systems. So yes, this is the problem that he's tackling now with KYXStart. And it's not just another check-the-box identity tool. It's built for companies that are growing fast. And here's the twist. It doesn't make you jump through hoops. And it plugs into over 500 verified data sources through a single API. So it doesn't matter where you're at, payments, crypto, lending, banking. It really adapts to all the local rules and tells you yes or no with real context behind it in a fast, accurate, and easy to configure for your risk model. So as you can imagine, Ravi saw what wasn't working and built what companies actually need. So Ravi, before we dive in to your background and KYXStart and all the reasons behind this stuff, man, how in the heck did you end up, or as I like to call it, how did you fall into FinTech?
When I first moved to this country, I realized everything revolves around payments. It doesn't matter what you do. It's the point of interaction. It's the point of transaction. everything revolves around payments. And I very soon realized if I have to grow and if I have to do something or if I have to make a difference, payments will be the place to do. And that's very closely linked to FinTech.
I can only imagine the stuff you had to go through to prove who you were and your identity and all those things. And you've seen this space from what I would guess to be just about every angle. And because you're inside of some of the biggest names like Equifax, Prove, Singular Key, and now you're leading Kickstart. This identity verification market has done some massive, rapid transformation. And one of the things I thought was really interesting as I dove a little bit deeper into it is that this market, it grew from almost $11 billion in 2023. That's only 2 years ago. 3 more years, it's expected to exceed over $21 billion and growing at nearly 15%. So, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, and I had to read those because I wanted to make sure I got the numbers right. But not only that, the fraud losses that we're seeing, we're hearing about, and, you know, there are a number of folks that I work with in the industry that really say that, hey, these types of things have gotten out of control. And it's starting to cost them anywhere from $4 to $6 every time they lose a single dollar. How have you seen these trends shape your perspective on the industry?
Absolutely, Ted. You're right on the money. And as I like to say, identity landscape today, it's like you're in a spy movie, and you've seen, when you're in a spy movie, you see a lot of things go by, right? But the challenge is that we on the good side, because I like to be on the good side, feels like we are using outdated systems, but the fraudsters are winning with deep fakes and, a lot of other basic way of, creating fraud or adding fraud to transactions. And, when we talk about identity and fraud, the first word comes to us is compliance. Oh, how are we going to stay compliant, right? And then you talk about compliance should be global as well, because if you pick up any app today that you have, it's a global app. Like there is not one app or user interface or a bank or a fintech that you can say, oh, I only do business in this country or in US or anywhere else, right? They're all global. And then, if you talk about today's landscape, then comes the Gen AI part, right? Which is a problem and a solution in itself. It's become so easy to generate synthetic identities and fake documents. It's really very, very hard to figure out who is on the other side. Like right now, you see me, that's why you're like, yeah, this is Ravi, I could trust it. And I put my logo behind it, and you'll assume that Ravi owns Kickstart, right? Having said that, fraud is like scaling up a startup, and your defense has to be as much scale too. It's a war amongst AI versus AI. And then the only AI that's going to win, it's the one that has more data.
I think you've just had the all-time record for this first person to mention AI on an episode that wasn't about AI. So I want to congratulate for that one. But, you talk about all these new things, and with all of the experience that you've had over time, how has your view of identity changed over time? Because I think about it, I originally thought identity, I'm like, okay, so security card, driver's license, how has that changed? And how has your view on identity changed since you got started?
Identity has become more and more contextual. And the more you think about it, it's in a digital journey. If you think about somebody's digital journey, right? When you are trying to market them, it's the same person. When you're trying to onboard them, it's the same person. When you're trying to, let them experience your platform, like make payments or move money or actually buy new stock, which nobody should do that considering what's happening last few days. Anyways, it's in my opinion, it has changed from a static way of looking at or just in point of time to a different signals that you can connect to identity. And at Kickstart, I like to say that we are in the business of creating an identity fabric and not an identity verification.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because you've worked in risk and fraud and compliance way before any of this stuff had the fancy buzzwords to go around it. And you mentioned earlier that today fraud techniques like deepfakes, synthetic identities are really pushing business to advanced solutions. And I love how you said it. It's like AI versus AI. So not only do we have AI powered fraud going on, we also now have to have AI powered fraud detection. And it's not just AI like a lot of people think. We start to get into multimodal biometrics. And I find it interesting that as we're all talking about these different things, that the legacy systems still dominate many of the workflows and leaving a lot of these companies that are exposed, vulnerable. I want to understand a little bit more about your perspective on the current identity verification landscape, because honestly, it feels like a step backwards. And what do you believe needs to shift?
The biggest myth in the industry is friction equals security. Okay, it's not true. Friction equals many drop-offs, right? And the other thing is that as you talk about most of the fintechs, and then, like you said, there are many incumbents out there. They all, in my humble opinion, that they have made an extra effort to modernize it, to do all the new stuff. But I still feel like they're stuck in 2015 where they think that, oh, if I scan a driver license, pretty strong identity verification. Think about, your life revolving around signals, right? Like you have telco signals, you have your banking signals, and then you have your social signals. So the way I think about it is that those signals that I just mentioned about, they are global in nature. However, your driver license and your national ID kind of makes you very, very localized, because in India, it's Aadhaar card. In certain countries, this. In Mexico, it's CURP ID. In US, it's SSN. Somewhere it's some other, it's passport, right? So all those things are very much geographical based. But, your phone number is global. Your social profile is global. And if you talk about your banking profile, that's also global. And those are the main networks. They are globally connected. Not your driver license is not globally connected, right? Because your driver license will not work in India, but your phone will work in India, in UK, everywhere else, right? Your bank account will work in let's just say if you go to Singapore and you want to spend, so it'll work in Singapore. So if you think about it, all those signals combined actually creates today's single identity fabric. And that's what I believe we are headed towards. And that's what I believe that you're going to see. And one other thing I'll tell you about, fraudsters are using, Chat GPT as they have a fraud GPT. If you probably never heard about it, but it's there. And what's happening is that today, if you Google what are the frauds that all these fintechs and banks are facing, there are different types of frauds coming in, but we don't have that many types of solution. So to many things that we are talking about, I believe, I believe that we should look at identity based on signals and also continuous identity and not just in point time.
At least from my perspective, it hasn't been that long since we had to really start looking at how do we get closer to real time. You've got the experience from working with some companies that I'll call legacy or outdated systems that, just add and stack all the operational inefficiencies and make it really difficult to do anything in real time. So you're, like you mentioned, a point in time going on. Then on top of that, I think one of the things that I wanted to really get an understanding from you is it sounds like your focus is more on decentralized identity and decentralized models so that you can adapt as the legal standards and all of the regulatory pieces come into play. How do you see that changing the friction for friction's sake and enhancing the customer satisfaction?
I think we just talked about point in time. What I compare point in time is looking at paper map in today's world to navigate. That's how antiquated that has become. Fraud is not really stopping, right? Fraud is constantly evolving and many things are happening. And then existing, products that are out there, many of them have made an amazing attempt to modernize it, and many of them have been able to do that. But it's in my humble opinion, it's that mentality of point solutions, which is what has caused them. At some point, they will become the laggards, right? So when you think about identity, it has to be real time, right? And then, it has to be a behavior at that point of time. And I will be brave enough and bold enough to say that for Kickstart, we believe we are in a whole different category. I won't even put us in a KYC or identity category. We are kind of putting us out there as a identity payments category, where we put our identity verification at the point of fraud, not after it's happening or 6 months before it was going to happen. And we are also moving away from being predictive, but we want to be more and more deterministic. And through the signals that we have access to, which are global in nature and which very much constitutes an identity, or constitutes a human being, for lack of better word, right? Is what we believe. That's where the puck is headed. That's where we are headed. And I believe we have the best in class, identity fabric or identity verification or identity payments platform right now.
When do you think identity verification shifted from a back-end process to this cornerstone of customer trust, where it's demanded to be seamless experiences along with being safe? Like, when do you think that happened, and what was the driving force behind it?
Well, customers were the driving force, right? And, as we have become more and more an online economy, you really wanted to know who's behind the scenes, or like we talked about earlier, right? And then the other thing is that customers started demanding, for the sake of their privacy, less and less amount of information that needs to be passed to the online system. And that kind of evolved into creating a frictionless economy, where even when you go today to pay somewhere, you don't take out your plastic, you just tap your phone and you do your payments and you walk away, right? But that kind of experience they wanted in an online economy as well. Is that, hey, all I need to do is give my phone number and my date of birth. That's all you need to know. Everything else you can go do that, and then the magic will happen, right? And then, trust is the cornerstone, right? And then trust comes from knowing who's on the other side. And that was one other reason that in order to build trust between the systems and the customer that's actually using the product or actually interacting with the product, you had to build that identity verification as the most seamless. At the same time, that became the cornerstone on anything and everything that I do. I have this very quirky thing to say. Identity is, for any system, is like sanitation, right? It has to always work, and it has to be frictionless.
Support provided by Skyflow. What if you could build fast but not break privacy? What if you could ensure data privacy, governance, and compliance with just a few API calls? What if you could worry less about PCI requirements while actually improving privacy and security? How much more time would your team have to truly innovate? How much faster could you build and ship new features? How much more powerful could your app be? Skyflow is a zero-trust data privacy vault delivered as an API. Skyflow's radically simple design lets you collect, secure, and tokenize personal information like card data and payment details. And with built-in features like encrypted data analysis and sharing, anonymization, and advanced governance, your days of choosing between data security and data usability are over. Whether you're just concerned with PCI compliance or need to go further to include CCPA, GDPR, SOC 2, and beyond, Skyflow has you covered. What if you could build fast but not break privacy? With Skyflow, you can. Visit skyflowsecure.com today to learn how.
Right. So we've talked about the market dynamics. We're talking about the reasons. We've talked about all these different pieces. The identity verification market is currently, from my perspective, being driven by the increasing fraud and the regulatory pressures. And in the US, identity theft concerns and compliance demands are only reflected by the fact that losses in 2023 reached over $10 billion. And in my opinion, a lot of that really came down to just not being able to respond fast enough or made it so difficult to respond. I would really like to understand from you what inspired KYXStart's mission to really rethink identity verification and why now?
So, identity verification, to your point, like you said, came out of, oh, there is fraud happening. Let's stop that. Let's put a system out there, right? But we look at it from a whole different lens of view or whole different lens. We are looking at identity and identity verification as a revenue generation opportunity, not as a fraud prevention opportunity. The mantra is very simple. More number of good users come in, good transaction happen, and then as you monitor them, you will see good results at the end of the day, right? We should stop fraud at the point of inception, not after the fact it has happened. That's why I'm saying that we are in a domain of identity payments, is that first things first, that we've also started looking at identity from a global point of view, not as a geographical. It's a global point of view, right? Every fintech wants to be global. The second thing is that we've also started looking at identity, which is like we talked about many times, it's frictionless, but also from revenue generation point of view is that the more number of good people we pass, the more higher the revenue, the higher the margins of the business becomes at the end of the day, right? So in my opinion, if you have if you have an identity system that does not give you more than 90% match rate, I think you're leaving a lot of money on the table. So that's the thought process that we got in. And Ted, what we also realized is that if we have to be global in nature, we have to also think about different types of identity signals, which result into different types of data sources that we need to connect per country. Not like in one country I have 10, in other country I have like a half data source that does not verify half of the population. So what we had in mind is think about a system where identity orchestration, where it goes to multiple types of data sources to give you a best possible match rate.
What has changed in global fintech that makes the model you just described of pulling data when you need it, pulling it from all the different places, pulling it globally, bringing it together, and doing it with as little information as possible? What makes this much more effective today than maybe it did 3, 4, 5 years ago?
Need for identity to be smart and to be smooth as well, right? And then I think the data pulling from multiple sites, we call it as a deep search, where we go and pull in different types of data sources and bring it together to create a real Ravi, not an anime Ravi, right? So, and also the need has also changed from the point of view that today, everybody, and I keep saying this again, is that everybody is trying to build a global first platform and they're not trying to be geographically bound. And then the one other last thing that has changed is that it is the whole developer economy, right, Ted? Like you go, first thing you see, where are your developer APIs, right? What the mindset over there is efficiency. So what we did was we said, why not bring all of that under single API so we can attract all these developers to come in and say, oh, it's as easy as integrating with one. All right. So the mindset shift also changes at that point.
One of the things that I think about is that all of the companies that I work with, and we're trying to build out their risk and their underwriting and their onboarding, and we've got ongoing underwriting going, and we're doing this constantly. We're building all this out. We end up stuck in this purgatory of what is the decision? What should the decision be? It's not a yes or no. Yeah, you get a lot of those, but there's a lot of those that fall like right in the middle. How are you seeing AI-powered technologies? Things that come to mind are like behavioral biometrics, liveness detection, and how are you seeing that help operational teams with their decision-making in real time.
But unfortunately, I feel like I said, it's AI versus AI, right? It's the same AI that's bringing it down by letting you, morph your face to any live streaming, even as you're doing, right? Today, after you're done recording, you can change my face and nobody would know. So, having said that, right, what I think is also happening is that these biometrics and, a live face scan and all those things, how much ever they're advanced, they're also device dependent, right? So if you don't have a good device, like if you had, whatever, an old flip phone, there is not much you could do with that, right? So what we are trying to say is that make it device agnostic. Don't try to be dependent on any external factors. Make it more data dependent, which is what and any AI platform would know. And also, if you think about, when you do an identity verification, you're not just like you said, it shouldn't be just a check mark. You also want to get to know, like Ravi, like, does Ravi have a WhatsApp account? Does Ravi, how many times Ravi changes his phone number? Or does Ravi post on Instagram? Or, for that matter, how many times Ravi's identity has been breached, right? So he or she can take a look at it very different lens. So all those things combined, the word that comes to me is contextual identity verification. And I think that's where we are really headed.
That often gets overlooked when we talk about risk, compliance, identity verification, all these different tools, is the fact that if you do it right, it doesn't mean that you have less losses. Well, it does. It does. But what it also means a lot of times is that you have additional revenues, and when, from my experience in working through streamlining onboarding processes for a bunch of embedded technology companies and payment facilitation and embedded banking and all this other fun stuff, when you get the boarding process right and you reduce the friction pieces of it, it wasn't unusual for us to see a good onboarding experience go to a great onboarding experience, to see a 10 to 15% increase in overall revenue for that account. And then ones that were really bad to good, not great, just good, we were seeing jumps from like 25 to 60% just because we were able to clean up that experience. So I can only imagine what Kickstart is doing. Have you guys seen any additional uplift from reducing the friction? Because the ID verification process is probably one of the most frictionful experiences. Are you seeing a faster onboarding rate? Do you see a longer hold rate? Like, help us understand like what metrics you're seeing by implementing this minimalistic single API approach.
You know where your tech is working when the client stops calling you, right? And they call you, they only call you when they have to open a champagne, right? They're like, oh, let's celebrate. And that's the mentality that we have, is that we want to be under the covers and nobody should wake up and say, and frankly, to your point, Ted, nobody wakes up in the morning. Like, you ask any FinTech, they're like, oh, I'm going to solve the identity verification problem, right? They wake up when they know that they're going to make extra money, right? That's one of the biggest motivators of any FinTech organization. Other than, I feel like, in my opinion, they are the Avengers. Some of them are trying to take your money. Some of them are trying to keep money in your pocket, right? The customers, when they see more people coming into their ecosystem, and if they can increase their trust by showing that they're looking at various different elements and being a little bit transparent with their own customer as well, like, hey, I know these many things about you, your trust automatically increases. And I'll be honest with you, man. Today, if I send you a link which says, kickstart.net, okay, kickstart.net, and gives you 10 fields and says submit here and I'll give you a credit card, nobody will ever enter their data manually and on some funny looking website, right? You want it to be new age, because all these we've been used to, because of the social media boom, because of the prior e-commerce boom, we are used to having world-class experience. And to build a world-class experience, you have to build a world-class onboarding mechanism, like you said, which, to a certain extent has to be frictionless, and it has to get to know user intimately rather than at that point, I just did a check mark and I'll call you, or I'll wait for you to make some mistakes, which is when we'll connect again.
Some of the things that you and I talked about as we were preparing for this is deterministic decisioning, some behavioral analytics, while at the same time enabling businesses to go global and without having to worry about navigating all these complex requirements. I want to understand how Kickstart's technology is doing some of these things and what makes it so different from what most teams are using today.
We have built a platform that is thinking security first, right? So that's the first thing that we have done, and also compliance first. So we have, under one umbrella, brought in not only technical experts that are part of my team, but also the technological expertise that's needed to comply with global data laws. Like, for example, if you consider Indian data cannot go out. So we have, cloud servers that maintain and manage data over there. Then we have GDPR up in Europe. And then, we have different data laws in various other, like in Australia, it's similar things, right? So what we have done is, with the founding team that we have, with all the, like 25 years of knowledge that we have around data compliance, and I also like to call us as a data hungry team. Like we are all about data. You think about a specific point of data, we have it and we build it with security, compliance, and I would say primarily security, compliance, and safety around it. And also to build that contextual identity, if I may. So, having said that, think about, the mission and vision, like you talked about earlier, which is, decentralizing identity. I would also add a word called democratizing and decentralizing identity, by which, yes, you are collecting all the signals in a compliant way, but you can build an identity for any I say 6 billion individuals, because there are certain parts and places it's very hard to get to, but about good give or take 6 billion individuals across the globe. And what we have also done, which is different, Ted, is that we've not stopped at consumers. We've also built the business identity part. So we also do KYB, which is know your business, or I call it business identity verification, so that we can close the loop from the point of view that a fintech will also do business with consumers, will also do business with businesses. So they don't have to now look for another point solution somewhere else for business verification as well.
So I would say one of the things that's been consistent across this, and I would say most of the fintechs that I talk to, is data. And you're taking it from over 500 different input sources, or I think you called them signals. So you got 500 signals coming in. And I think back to the days when I was the guy writing the Boolean string to run a SQL query to find some data. Sometimes it took forever. And so I'd like to help understand, how you guys are leveraging light search versus deep search, because the light search allows you to get really, really quick results, but doesn't allow you to dig in really deep. And then deep is deep search, as I mentioned. I mean, it takes a little bit longer, but it allows you to get really, really deep. Help me understand how critical the ability to do both has become, especially as you mentioned, you've got AI fighting AI, adding more sophisticated techniques. How are you guys doing? Are you doing that? How does that look like? What does that look like for you all?
Yeah. So Ted, put things in context, is that these are 500 different data sources. They may bring in 50,000 signals, right? So, and to your point, how we are bringing it all together is with world-class platform that we have created. And when we say live search, by that, what I mean is that when you're onboarding, all you need is a name, phone number, and an email address. Is that accurate? Does that belong to Ted? Once you're done with that, when you do onboarding, right, at that point, you may add date of birth and address to that and or national ID. And you're like, yeah, this is Ted. And by the way, we verified his national identity or what have you, right? But now when you go to payments, now you want to know if this credit card belongs to Ted or this routing number and account number belong to Ted to stop wire fraud, ACH fraud, check fraud, and all the other types of frauds, right? So even connecting to those particular data sources that can help us verify and connect identity with payment. So when you think about it, it's really going as deep as you want and being as light as you would like for it to be, right? But now the magical thing is that if I told you, hey, there are 10 different APIs, 10 different products, 10 different pricing, you'd be like, I don't want to work with that. So what we did was we brought in all under one umbrella with one API. It depends on the number of inputs that you get in, and that's the number of outputs you will get in. Fun fact for us is that we are very much driven by our clients. So our roadmap is very much driven by our clients, right? And I'll give you a perfect example. We were working with a crypto company up in Europe, and they said, Ravi, how about telco signals? 2 weeks later, we had telco signals adapted and ready to go for them to consume. So it's kind of managing and balancing what your customer wants, what you think, what's really needed, and what is actually going to make, stop the fraud and also make it onboarding easier. So balancing all of that and taking what's right and putting it in our platform has really worked well for us.
I would love for you to walk us through your favorite implementation other than that one. And, what did it do for them for fraud reduction, onboarding speed, match rates? Help us understand, your favorite, you don't have to call them out by name, but you can if you want to, but your favorite implementation and why it was your favorite and what they benefited from.
Yeah. There was a FinTech who came to us that was drowning in fraud, right? And false positives and, users raging because they had to scan a driver license and, selfie scan. And even after that, they had to type in their name, address, and date of birth, right? And fast forward, we have now reduced the onboarding time by 80%. Their fraud rate, in that particular example went down by close to 60%, right? And 60% is, they had, let's just say 8% fraud. Now it's 2 to 2.5%, which is like friendly fraud. That's hard, and we're working with them on that. But more importantly, they had a 20% gain in their bottom line revenue. And I think that was the major delight that we fed. And that particular customer, was really delighted because one of the main reasons that they came to us is that they were doing cross-border payments. And they had to verify, the sender and the receiver at the same time. And they were like, hey, I'm going to send money to Brazil. How do I verify? I was like, it's the same API, just change the country name. And they were very, very delighted that now they would have to go look for some other team out there and which does the compliance and so on and so forth, right? Right. And we really help them look at the right tools for the right outcome. And the reason most of the enterprises that have worked with us and they really, really like us, Ted, is that their match rates are amazing because they can show that to their leadership, hey, whatever we've implemented, it's actually working. The other thing is that their fraud savings and the last part is the compliance, where they know that, there's somebody that's certifying in terms of, hey, your data is going at the right place. Nobody's storing, nobody's playing with it, and it's safe and secure. So, and the most important part, Ted, it's our clean dashboards with detailed logs. They just love it. When you have that kind of transparency, you speak Excel natively, right? So, when you could see stuff that it's working and it's very transparent, I think that's one of the things that enterprises like about us.
So, you've led teams at Prove and Equifax and now at Kickstart, and having that background in a large company and working with large institutions gives you this unique lens on how to grow with purpose. When you prioritize clarity and adaptability and you drive measurable growth in your business, it's generally done when you're fostering an environment where quick decision-making can be done and teams feel empowered to act decisively and really they end up performing at their highest levels, not just in execution speed, but also coming up with these innovative ideas to solve for the problem that you get back from your customer. So I'm really curious if you would share with us how you lead your teams and make sure that they're able to be fast, be accurate, and ready to adjust to the customer's needs.
I would tell you in a funny way, I had learned was being an entrepreneur, it's like jumping from a plane without a parachute and trying to figure out how to land. Like, this is a very big cliche, but I truly believe in that. And, and what I've done is I've built a team around me with the founder's mentality down to our, engineers and our developers. They all have, they all have the authority to come up with their own ideas. And actually, we also have built a team where we lead by ideas, not by position, right? And I think that's been really, really working for us. What we have put in our culture is about curiosity, is that, we don't, like, even our support team members will tell you a customer and a customer's use case, and to a point that how important that customer is in the greater cycle of, in the greater cycle of Kickstart, is that, hey, is this enterprise customer important or this, smaller startup important? And we believe every customer is important. We treat every customer equally. You could be an enterprise customer driving tremendous amount of revenue, or you could be a startup, which you never know could be the next enterprise in today's day and age, right? What we also believe is that, writing a software or building a startup is like music, right? It's like you have to write sheets of music and they all have to play well, and the sound of it or the end product should be very melodical, right? It cannot be melodious. It cannot be that, somebody that's an engineer that's throwing products really, really fast, and then, people who are in the sales team, they're like, oh, well, the customer is not ready for it. You don't want that either. So that's why, we feel like if you have founder's mentality and you have enough curiosity will lead to asking the right questions to your customers, and then you will build a platform that's actually solving a problem, not actually creating a problem and then trying to make your end customers understand there is a problem. That's why you need this product, right? So leading with clarity, curiosity, and a lot of caffeine. That's my favorite thing. I ship coffee.
I love it.
I ship coffee to all my team members. They're like, what are you doing? People send, all kinds of different bottles. I'm like, no, that's the only thing you need is caffeine.
You're building a fintech product. You want to offer digital assets, but wallets, that's the hard part. Security, compliance, key orchestration, blockchain integration. That's why fintechs, payment platforms, and custodians choose Defense. They provide wallets as a service that's API first, multi-chain by design, and secured with MPC. No single point of failure. So you can launch across over 50 blockchains, automate policy controls, and stay audit ready without managing private keys. Stripe's Bridge powers crypto payments through Defense. MoonPay scales wallets securely with Defense. Sphere grew without compromising on control or compliance. Even major FIs like Fidelity, ABN AMRO, as well as custodians like Zodia and Tungsten trust Defense to power their on-chain infrastructure. Developer ready, compliance approved, production grade from day one. If you're building in payments, exchanges, OTC desks, market makers, or DeFi, defense wallets work the way you need them to. Request your demo at fintechconfidential.com/DFNS. Defense, secure wallets, built right.
You talk about it being music. You talk about the different pieces, the curiosity, trying to listen, making the moves. But leadership always comes down to making the right decisions at the right time. So I'm curious, what are you prioritizing when you look at the company to make sure that it scales both the human side of the house, but also the technology?
The one thing that you really have to be good at, Ted, is not to follow the shiny object, right? And you have to have will to say no, like no, right? And as many no's that you can say, you can then say very few yeses, and more importantly, you will say yes to the problem that you want to solve for, right? And with that, comes clarity. With that comes like, okay, that's not for me. So that's why, when I told you that we are creating a whole new domain for us where, identity domain, not identity verification, not payments, it's identity payments is our domain where we combine identity and payments together, right? And, while we were thinking about that, we had to say no to so many things like, oh, am I going to do, blah, blah, blah. Am I going to do? No, right? That's what we were focused on. And at the end of the day, we are very crystal clear about our goal is to make fintechs the most safe, secure, and the trustworthy organizations that their consumers can come in so they can focus on what they're good at, which is making, coming up with smarter ways to move money, and then we can put the layer of trust on top of that.
How are you hiring? What are you hiring for? And I'm not talking about a developer or an engineer, but, how are you hiring the people that can be adaptable, that can make decisions quickly? Like, what are the things that you look for to bring that resilience and that problem solving skills to the table?
Well, the first thing that we look for in anybody that we work with, be it a business development guy or be it a sales guy or engineer or a product person, is do they have a founder's mentality, right? Do they have that bug where they are asking constantly questions, and it's questions over questions. They're like, man, this is, to a certain point where you're like, okay, they're starting to get what we are doing. So the part where I focus on is that how much of a due diligence that you do upfront and not say, oh, everything works. And then when it's the crunch time where you've lost time to do due diligence and it's time to execute, you are now laser focused on execution because you're very good at due diligence upfront. So the main capabilities, like I said, it's problem solving, and the other one is curiosity, and then the founder's mentality where you keep looking for innovative ways to solve a problem, not innovative ways to say how this will not be done. More importantly, how this can be done.
How do you make sure that they have that founder's mentality? How do you make sure that they are actually curious and not just pretending to be? How do you make sure so that like you keep that worry curve early in the process enough so that you're not 90 days down the road and going, oh, I'm sorry, this just didn't work out?
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example. We were trying to hire a product person, and we did realize that they were not a 0 to 1 person. As much of a great asset that they are from 5 to 50, they're not 0 to 1. And so, so we had to make a tough decision at that point. But look, there are different people for different stages, right? And that's the knack you get, when as you get older, get gray hairs, and you're in the industry for that long, right? And you also and you also know people around you, right? So you're not going by just what you know, you're going by 10 other people that know about that particular person. Because again, when you're starting something new, you are not going to look people fresh out of colleges. You're really looking for to a certain point, you know them and you kind of think about them as co-founders, not as, oh, just, I hired somebody to work with me.
Let's talk about what's next for identity. It's evolving extremely rapidly. The tools change every day. The data sources get bigger and bigger and bigger and more robust and crisscross over the top of each other. The AI side of the fraud that we talked about, I mean, it's already accounting for nearly 40% of all attempts. Fake fraud, synthetic identity has surged by over 2,000% in just the last 3 years, right? So as we're thinking through this and we're thinking about decentralized identity models and all the fun stuff that we've talked about with these shifts, I'm going to ask you, take a deep look into the crystal ball and tell us, what do you see the future holds for us in the next 5 or so years? And how do we stay ready for what's next?
Well, if I were to tell you future of identity based on the paperwork or all the Gartner reports and then other things that I have to tell you, I would tell you it's decentralized, consent-driven, and AI augmented. And if I want to add more buzzwords to it, it will be zero knowledge proof, federated identity, privacy-preserving credentials, right? It sounds like sci-fi. But I would tell you what...
We have to look some of that up, by the way, Ravi.
All those things are sci-fi, right? But I'll tell you what we are working on. We are really working on a walletless wallet, Ted. So, we want to be a situation where, let's just say Ted really, really likes his X platform, right? Or Twitter or X. You want to use X to open a bank account, you should be able to do that. Why not, right? Or if you want a bank account to verify that, yes, I'm a valid, like you need a blue check mark on X, you should be able to do that as well. So what we are, that's why our lens is really a walletless wallet, right? And if you think about what's going to happen in agentic AI level, right? You and Ted and I, Ravi, doesn't ever have to do a podcast. There'll be 2 AI agents that look alike can build this podcast, right? You must have seen that a lot. And I have a bunch of friends that have started that doing already. They put in one prompt and voila, the podcast is ready, right? But if you think about it, that still doesn't represent me or it still doesn't represent them. In the real world, you want an external agent to represent you. Well, guess what? They're not going to have a plastic. They're not going to have a phone. They're not going to have all the features, all the signals that you and I talked about, right? But they will have one thing in common, which is they are related back to you as an identity, right? And it'll be by virtue of you giving them permissions to say, yeah, act like my cousin over here, act like my dad over here, or act like my kids who are going to drain all my money and go buy whatever you want to buy, right? So when you do all those things, it still comes down to you. So what we are working on in the future is like I said, is a walletless wallet that depends on whatever identity hook that you have, and it will preserve on whatever device or what have you that you have. So at least we have the mindset of that particular point. And I'm willing to put stake in the ground in the next 5 years. There has to be a global identity emerge, and that would be wallets that are chain of wallets per se, but where we will come on the top is to create a walletless wallet, if I have to say it that way. And that walletless wallet you will be able to use it on agentic format or create your own agents, or you will be able to go to a social media platform and say, hey, anybody that does not represent this type of identity, don't let them post content on my behalf. And as you have seen, you just talked about a lot of things. One of the things that we are seeing is that people are getting punished for putting content on social media platforms. That's going to have a reverse effect of social media platforms wanting to, either watermark or digital footprint those particular content. So more things are coming, man. And, to your crystal ball, it's going to keep spinning because, today that's what is important, but tomorrow, something else will become of prime importance.
There's a lot of projects out there that are on blockchain that really are trying to lean towards that self-sovereign identity direction. And I like that because I can't tell you how often, but it's often, I get the little notice that my information's been found on the dark web, and then it tells me the myriad of places that it comes from. And until we can get out of a centralized identity store, the cyber attacks are just going to continue to grow towards those centralized locations. And, between 2023 and 2024, the end of 2020, all of 23 and 24, during that time period, number of attacks that were happening on central data stores like that increased by over 75%. So if you think about that from my perspective, I'd love to figure out how do I get my information off of these centralized data stores? How do I hold on to it? How do I allow it to happen? And how do I share that when I want to share it? And maybe I'm not actually sharing the data. Maybe I'm just sharing the validation that I am who I say I am versus the actual data that validates that information. That's where my brain goes with all of this fun stuff. I'd like to figure out a way to slow down the synthetic IDs and all of the fun voice cloning and the deep fakes and all that fun stuff. But I think with this decentralized identity, the walletless wallet, as you called it, and being able to support the continuous authentication, that really will break into a new space. And I'm excited to see where Kickstart goes with all that fun stuff. And Ravi, I really appreciate the time you took with us today, but I have one last question. And I started to ask it earlier, but then I backed off. But for other FinTech founders out in the marketplace today, if you had to give them one piece of advice, what would it be? And in one sentence.
Don't chase the shiny object. Solve the boring problems really, really well. Get obsessed with your users, not with your tech stack. And, and I love the analogy that you gave, which is, where the identity has to be headed and in terms of your convenience, right? And I do know that the fintechs are also kind of looking at that, but, they are not identity experts. They should be working with experts to solve their identity problems, for lack of better word. But like I said, if you want one word, solve the boring and the painful problems really, really well, and get obsessed with your users, not with your tech stack.
Ravi, thanks again, man. Like we went through the data, the signals, the importance, the speed, the solving of the problems, the increased revenues. Man, we hit on just about everything that a lot of people don't think about when we think about identity. And I really appreciate you going through that with me and really bringing your unique insight today's show.
Absolutely, man. Ted, it's been an absolute blast. And thank you for all the questions and even better vibes. But, I do wanna mention one thing, man, is that, identity is increasingly connected to payments, which is where all the fraud is, where the money movement is. And that's where really we feel like we built Kickstart, right? That's the main purpose of it, is to create a trust, scalable, security, invisible, and make identity less awkward, right? Make sure that it's in the context and it's with the right signals at the right point of time. What I would say is that if you are a fintech, look us up and come and have a conversation with us. At the least, we will geek out on all the problems that we have and probably learn something new, right? And until then, keep listening to Tedd Huff's FinTech's Confidential podcast, because you've come up with some amazing leaders that you've done your podcast, amazing content. So really appreciate it. And thanks a lot for having me.
Well, folks, don't worry. You're not going to have to go far to look up Ravi and Kickstart. We're going to go ahead and drop that down in the show notes as well as on fintechconfidential.com. So you'll be able to find it there without any problem. And well, that does it for another episode of FinTech Confidential's Leaders One-on-One series. And I really appreciate you sticking around with us for these conversations that are designed to give you more than just a surface level soundbite. They're here to show you how real operators think, how they lead, and how they make things happen in FinTech. And if you got value from today's episode, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listened. And if you want to go deeper into what we're tracking behind the scenes and our upcoming newsletter, go ahead and sign up at fintechconfidential.com and share with someone who's serious about where FinTech is going. And as always, keep moving forward.
As we wrap up today's episode, I've got one last thing for you. If you're in the trenches fighting fraud and financial crime, you know it's a complex battlefield. That's where Hawk's AI tools for real-time payment screening, AML, transaction monitoring, and dynamic customer risk rating come into play. These aren't just buzzwords. They're game changers designed to make your compliance more effective and less of a headache. Imagine slashing through false positives with precision and giving your compliance strategy the edge it needs. Head on over to gethawk.com to sign up for a demo and discover how their platform can revolutionize how you fight fraud and financial crime.
This has been a production of DD3 Media with all rights reserved. This is provided for informational purposes only. It is not offered or intended to be used as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. We strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, but will not be responsible for any missing facts or inaccurate information. You comply and understand that you should use any of this information at your own risk. Cryptocurrencies are highly volatile financial assets, so research and make your own financial decisions.